We are now in Chapter 10. So far, we've covered claims, evidence, and warrants, the different ways these elements can be weak, and how to make sure they are sound in a good argument. Now we will discuss the fourth element in arguments, qualifications. Qualifications are parts of an argument that limit the certainty of your conclusions, specify the conditions in which your claim is true, and address your reader's potential objections. The three elements necessary for every argument are claims, evidence, and warrants. However, if you only have these three elements in your arguments might be too simple, to the point of being simple-minded. A significant claim often depends on assumptions that are true only in certain circumstances. Most arguments are not 100% certain all of the time. Readers expect you to acknowledge any uncertainty in your arguments, the limits on your warrant, and the reader's reservations. It may seem strange, but acknowledging your argument's limits makes it gain rhetorical strength. There are four ways you may have to qualify your argument, which are to rebut mistaken objections to your evidence or warrants, to concede objections that you cannot rebut, to specify conditions that qualify your evidence or limit the application of your warrant, to specify the degree of certainty of your evidence, warrant, or claim. Let's look at rebuttals first. Readers will question your argument as they read. You must acknowledge them by anticipating their questions and making the limits of your claims explicit. Readers are likely to question the quality of evidence or warrants, and how you rebut those objections depends on their nature. If you think that your readers might think that your evidence is insufficient because there are other evidence that runs against your claim, you need to show that you have considered that evidence but rejected it with a good reason. If you anticipate an objection that your warrant is flawed, you can show why you believe that it's sound. There are four kinds of objections that you should search for. 1. Consider raising objections and alternatives to your claims that you have considered but rejected in your research. You don't have to raise these because readers are unlikely to be aware of these alternatives, but you can increase your credibility if you show that you can rebut mistaken claims and reject seemingly acceptable evidence. 2. Anticipate objections that you know readers will bring with them. You need to anticipate and address objections based on well-known arguments that contradict aspects of your argument, or based on a warrant that your readers will not accept. If you don't do this before the readers actually object to your arguments, you will seem ignorant of work in your field or contemptuous of the reader's beliefs. 3rd, anticipate alternatives that your readers might think of. Readers might think of alternative explanations that they believe you should have at least considered. You should explain, and if you can, refute any alternatives you can think of. 4. Anticipate objections that might occur to your readers as they read. These objections are the hardest to anticipate out of the four types discussed so far. Perhaps readers may think that your evidence isn't solid, or that you stretch logic. If you don't anticipate these objections, you will seem ignorant of the limits of your argument, excluding disagreements on fact and accuracy of evidence. Readers are most likely to object on these grounds. Incorrectly defined key terms, because definitions are warrants in your argument. They connect your evidence and your claim with additional information, so wrong definitions can affect your whole argument. Oversimplified causes and effects. Few effects have a single cause. Few causes have a single effect. Avoid simple answers to complex questions. Overgeneralization on insufficient evidence. Nearly all of the time, researchers will overgeneralize to some extent because it's nearly impossible to collect every bit of evidence in the world. However, you need to collect sufficient evidence as best as you can so that readers will not easily find evidence that disconfirms your claim. In consideration of counterexamples and special cases, you should try to think of counterexamples to generalizations before your readers do. You should acknowledge that there are counterexamples, but state that they do not seriously affect your generalization. Now we are on concessions as qualifications. In an honest argument, you need to acknowledge objections that you cannot answer. You risk revealing a gap in your reasoning, but you gain credibility from acknowledging your limits, but make sure that your support more than compensates for the objection. If you discover unrebuttable objections early, you can revise your argument or even your claim. Concession will make experienced researchers think better of your argument and you, and is also a way to invite readers into the conversation. Another way to make qualifications is to set limiting conditions. Researchers usually do not bother to and cannot rebut to reservations about unpredictable changes in conditions that you assume will not occur but might. For example, if we say, we can conclude the earthquake occurred in central Costa Rica, We don't add as long as the instrumentation had been accurately calibrated at the end, because it is expected that the instrument works. But sometimes we can stipulate a reservation in order to be cautious or to acknowledge against a foreseeable and reasonable possibility. For example, we can say, unless it can be shown that the newspapers critical of Roosevelt were controlled by special interests, their attacks demonstrate significant dissatisfaction with Roosevelt's presidency. The qualification, which is in italics and is underlined, leaves room for the reservation that the newspapers were controlled by special interests. Limiting the scope and certainty of your claim and evidence can also qualify your argument. Usually, your arguments will not be 100% certain, your evidence 100% reliable, and your claims true 100% of the time. This is nearly impossible. To be credible, you must limit the scope of your arguments. You can do this by using modifying words and phrases that hedge, to make less certain your claims and evidence. Phrases such as one of the most admired, tend to be, may have, and probably give your argument subtlety. Some teachers might tell you never to hedge, saying that A is B is always better than A may be B. But this is not true. Careful researchers should know that they must hedge to seem confident, while thoughtfully acknowledging the limits of their arguments. Hedging is one of the strongest influences on your persona, the character the readers perceive from your writing. Don't hedge too much, or you will seem evasive. Don't hedge too little, or you will seem smug. Those were the 4 ways of qualifying your argument. Now we will talk about building a complete argument. It's important to note that there is no necessary sequence in any particular argument. Real-time arguments are less sharply defined, as warrants and qualifications get folded into the same sentence with the claim, and simple arguments, depending on different warrants and different types of warrants, build up to one complex argument. You can arrange the elements of the same argument in different orders. This will result in different rhetorical effects, though it is technically the same argument. Your argument can guide your research and reading as well. The structure of an argument will help you think through your project. Anticipating what you have to include based on its elements will help you read accordingly. It will help you read more critically. As you read, ask the same questions that your readers will probably ask you. These elements will help you organize your materials and your thinking as you prepare for your first draft. Your earliest outlines should focus on the elements of your argument. The elements of your argument can help you identify the parts of your paper and guide your drafting. The elements of your argument can also help you to anticipate what your readers will think of you, because nothing more reveals a person's character than the way that person tries to convince other people to change their minds. Strong feelings can also have a large impact on your argument. When readers feel a researcher's warm commitment to the argument in the writing, they will attend to the argument more closely. It's almost impossible to teach this quality directly. Just think about this, which rhetoricians since Aristotle have said. Every argument depends on 3 appeals: its logos, its pathos, and its ethos. The reader's conviction depends on all 3. Try to construct a good argument with all 3 of these appeals. And that is the end of Chapter 10, and the end of Part 3 in the craft of research.